Can you outwork a bad diet? In other words, can you burn enough calories to remove all the bad work you did by eating poorly? The short answer is no. You cannot outwork or outtrain a bad diet. And if you think about this in practical terms, say you're an average working person, you have a desk job or a non-active job, you can probably commit an hour of exercise a day, maybe 90 minutes, depending on your travel time and what your life is like and what engagements you have and how much you work. And in that time, realistically, unless you're doing some super duper high intensity stuff, you're going to burn 300 to 600 calories, right? That's probably about the cap of what you're realistically going to burn. And as most of you know, that doesn't take that much to eat, right? One donut might be 400 calories, right? So you can undo that mathematically pretty quickly. So a better way to think about your food is that's what you use to manage your weight, and your exercise is what you use to manage your fitness and your health, so to speak. So let me unpack that a little bit further. So there are a lot of really, really beneficial reasons for exercise, but weight control should not be a primary one. So your cardiovascular fitness, right, reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease. The more muscle you have, the more insulin sensitive you are, so less likely you are to develop diabetes. The less likely you are to have all kinds of metabolic diseases. So exercise and fitness is more about managing your health and your longevity in that sense. And you have to think of your food as managing your weight. Food can also affect your health, a different conversation, but for the purpose of this, if you want to manage your weight, ultimately it's going to come down to your diet, not your exercise program. And that's, antithetical to my whole career, which is about exercise, but the amount of calories you can burn exercising is just not going to be the primary mover to getting you to lose weight. So you got to think about your food through that lens and eat in a way that serves the purpose that you're trying to serve. So if you're trying to gain weight, obviously you need to eat enough food to do that. If you're trying to lose weight, you need to eat less food in order to accomplish that. And don't really consider your exercise into that. And a mistake I've seen a lot of people make is things like MyFitnessPal, which I love. It's great to track your macros and your nutrients. But when you exercise, you give yourself that extra calories that you've burned, and you end up not really going in any direction that you want to. And there are reasons to do that. If you're doing, for example, I might work out for 3 hours one day. Well, yeah, okay. I'm going to need to replenish that. I can't be in a deficit like that. But for the average person, it's just not a concern. It's not something you really need to worry about. So think of your exercise purely as a way to maintain your health, increase your longevity, improve your muscle mass, improve your mobility, and think of your food as a way to manage your weight. I think when people consider the, out training a bad diet, they get in this vicious cycle of using food as a reward for their activity. And I fall into that trap too sometimes, but again, the math is just not going to sync up very well in your favor, regardless of what your goal is. So you've got to take the idea of food being a reward mechanism out of your mindset and think of food as fuel for whatever your goal is with your health and with your physique and with your weight. And use food as think about what food is. It's fueling you, right? The whole purpose of calories is to provide energy to do the things you want to do. You don't need calories to not fuel anything. So if you're eating excess fuel, like think about you're filling up a car. If you fill up the gas tank in the car and it goes past what it can hold, it's just going to spill out the sides, right? And unfortunately, your body's not going to just spill it out. It's going to hang on to it. So you really got to think about your food for fuel to function your activity and what you do on a daily basis. And one thing I really try to get across to people, and it's hard because carbs are such a huge part of our culture, and I'm not demonizing carbs. There's a purpose for carbohydrates, but if you are not very active, your body just does not need them, quite frankly. You can have a little bit for brain function. You don't need it. Your body can run on ketones. You don't need glucose really for anything. But as a society, carbs are the cheapest thing to produce. So they're the most common thing in our diet. And unfortunately, people just aren't that active. And unless you have a very active job, you're just not going to need that many carbohydrates. So getting those out of your system can really, really help manage your weight. And I've talked about this many times, but if you are eating carbohydrates, trying to do things that do not impact your insulin very much or your blood sugar, and eating things that are really, really low glycemic. So carbs that are packed with protein and fiber are going to go a lot further than simpler carbohydrates that have very little nutritional value. But think about your day, your average life. You know, if you exercise for an hour, that's not enough to warrant, eating a pint of ice cream or having some donuts or cake or some kind of snack. Like, it's just not that many calories. And we all fall into this trapping of rewarding ourselves post-exercise. And again, I do this too. I just take it to such an extreme level that I can kind of get away with it because I will work out for 2 or 3 hours a day. But in practical sense, that's just not realistic for people. So think about food more to fuel what you want out of life, out of your body, out of your energy needs. And just realize that if you're not that active, frankly, you just don't need that many calories or that many carbohydrates. You do need protein. Protein is the most important thing you can eat for a myriad of reasons. But if you can limit your carbohydrates to really only using them when you need them, you're going to have a much easier time managing your weight and managing your health.